Continuing education knows that at the end of the day, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we really listen to their needs, and we can offer them flexible options both within continuing education and across the campus.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Everybody, welcome to the Conference of World Affairs in person and online. First, I'm Achilles Lagrave. I'll be your moderator today. I'm a Boulderite and first-generation immigrant, technologist, and activist, and someone who happens to spend the majority of my time these days thinking about the value of human connection and the value of experiences over things. Today's panel is Beyond Digital Isolationism, Reclaiming Human Connection. And we are living through a paradox. We've never been more connected, yet felt more alone. The Surgeon General has called loneliness an epidemic as dangerous as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. And here we are, all of us together, which is not trivial. It might be the most radical act of resistance some of us perform all week. I have 4 extraordinary human beings here with us today. But first, the University of Colorado, Colorado's flagship university, honors and recognizes the many contributions of Indigenous people in our state. CU Boulder acknowledges that it is located on the ancestral territories and homelands of the Cheyenne, Arapaho, and Ute, and many other Native American nations. Their forced removal from these territories has caused devastating and lasting impacts. While the University of Colorado at Boulder can never undo or rectify the devastation wrought on Indigenous peoples, we commit to improving and enhancing engagement with Indigenous peoples and issues locally and globally. Some very quick housekeeping. This is being recorded. We'll save time for questions, and there are cards that will be available for you to write your questions. If you're a student, if you could please write student in the upper corner so that we can prioritize your questions. And first, as we get started, I'd like each panelist to introduce themselves and spend a few moments telling us how they come into this panel at this time. So we'll start with you, Cynthia.
Good morning, everyone. Oops. Hit my button. Good morning, everyone. Very grateful to be here. It's my first time at the conference, and it's just been a beautiful experience for me. In life, I'm an emotional integration leadership coach. I'm a best-selling author. I'm an international speaker and a TEDx speaker. And I believe I'm on this panel because in the last 8 years, I've spent a lot of time in universities and with students. I co-taught a science and spirituality class at the School of Mines. I was in a Templeton grant for 3 years on teaching with heart, and I'm currently in a grant from Wake Forest and Virginia Tech on compassion and STEM education. So I've had a lot of time with the students, and it's really been an unprecedented time in terms of technology. It has really supported them in research and all kinds of other things to help them expand. And the level of isolation and loneliness that I've witnessed has been extraordinary. And they talk about it. They feel like there is this pressure from the university, from the professors to really produce. And so then that takes them deeper into technology so that they can produce, but then they're not sleeping, they're not administering self-care. They're not eating well, isolations. The level of suicides in universities has gone up. And when I was looking at stats, 1 in 3 students are saying that they experience loneliness on a regular basis, and 70% of them say they experience isolation at some time, and 60% say they're overwhelmed. So I'm very much looking forward to this conference and what the other panelists have to say. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Scott Sherman, and I think the reason I'm here, some of you, if you saw one of my earlier panels, I apologize for repeating myself, but my passion is developing a program that I call the Ironman of Love. And the idea is, just as doing an Ironman triathlon seems like a superhuman feat, that the idea that anyone could swim 2.4 miles, then run, bike 112, and then run a full marathon of 26.2 miles, it seems superhuman, but 1 million people in the world have achieved this. Could we do the same thing with helping people achieve what seem like superhuman levels of kindness, compassion, empathy, love, altruism, heroism, connection? This is what I'm passionate about. I've been in education for 30 years, teaching at Yale, Princeton, UCLA, Berkeley. I actually taught at CU for a few semesters. And I've seen the same thing that you described, this loneliness, this feeling of disconnection, even more so in an age of AI. And so when I see all these brilliant students who are learning so much information that's very useful, and yet not learning these key skills, that's what I'm passionate about, so I think that's why they invited me.
I'm Ty Tashiro, and let's see, I'm an expert in social awkwardness. Maybe that's one reason I'm here. I also do consulting sometimes for tech companies on things like online dating and that kind of thing. So I've been really interested in this topic in general. I'm really glad to be with everyone here, and I think talk about this it's a really pivotal moment in time. You look back through history and you're like, that was a threshold moment. I do believe we're there with this topic, and if we don't act in an assertive way, if you don't act in an assertive way as a parent or as a teen or young adult, if we don't do that collectively as a society, that's the kind of grim future that they talk about, the doomsday future. But it is in this window where we do have control, so I'm glad we're talking about it. I just wanted to share a little bit. You might not be aware of just how much time young adults spend on social media, so let me just level set that a little bit for context. So overall, from 13 to 21 years old, the average person spends about 5 hours a day on social media. So that's just social media, that's not their phone. What's interesting to me is for 13-year-olds, it's 4.1 hours a day on social media. Now that's an important number, I think, for that age group. For 17-year-olds, that's when it peaks. That's 6 hours a day for 17-year-olds. Importantly, girls spend 5.3 hours a day and boys spend 4.4. So there's a 1 hour difference between boys and girls. One other thing that I find really interesting about all of this, if you're a teen or young adult, you might get annoyed with your parents for being on your case about your social media or your phone. I understand that. But for parents and teens alike, let me tell you this. When parents agree in parental restrictions or parental monitoring of social media, the average use is 3.8 hours. When parents disagree with moderating their teens' social media use, the average is 6 hours. That's a dramatic difference, okay? The last thing I'll say, and then I'll pass it along, is I was trying to think about how to interpret the data in a way that's just kind of really easy to conceptualize. And I thought, if you ate a bag of Cheetos, okay, highly processed, highly delicious, is that going to kill you? No, you could probably eat a bag of Cheetos a day and you'd be all right. Now, what if you ate 4 bags of Cheetos a day? No, that's not great, right? What if you ate 6 bags of Cheetos. Kind of gross at that point, right? And I think if you look at the social media data, it kind of maps onto that thought experiment. If you have 1 or 2 candy bars, 1 or 2 bags of Cheetos, you're probably all right. You get 4, 6, that's when you start to get in trouble.
I'm wondering at what point you just turn orange. It's really my 4 or 5. I'm kind of trying to guess. I'm Sheila Warren. Good morning. It's so lovely to be here, and I can't wait to learn from all of these panelists and these wonderful people up here. I have had a long and strange career. I've been a corporate lawyer. I've built civic tech product. I've been a builder and a founder. I've worked in policy spaces. And now I have a portfolio where I'm doing some development aid work, some AI governance work, just a variety, some race equity work, a bunch of different kinds of things. But the through line I realized about 2 years ago was focusing on where is the humanity in our technology, in our online lives. And something I've been saying, so I apologize for being a bit repetitive on the other panels here, is, when we talk about AI specifically, which is an area I happen to know quite a bit about, I think that we miss the forest for the trees, because a lot of what's happening in AI is actually reflective of the problems we're having in our society. And those are upstream problems. So the dehumanization that we're experiencing, the increased dehumanization, the increased isolation that we're seeing online, there's no question that is catalytic, but it's also reflective of something broader and bigger that's happening. So Vivek Murthy, the former Surgeon General, is my college classmate. And at our college reunion, he gave a keynote that I think sparked a lot of us to sit up, right? And this was around the time he was starting to talk about loneliness as being this form of illness, on a form of pathology, right? That could actually be addressed and remediated through measures, through like medical kinds of measures, not literally through medicine, but through interventions that were designed to address this problem. I think it hit something for those of us who are parents. I have 3 young daughters, and I've watched some of their classmates. We have a pretty strict, in my house, social media rule. We have a pretty strict, the iPads just shut off at a certain time of night. They're just bricked, right? They're useless to you. That's kind of we've found that sort of draconian approach is the only thing that really works. And the minute you start to slip, then all of a sudden there's always a reason why you need a little bit more of this or that or whatever it is, right? So that's the way we've approached that problem, which has its own consequences. But we've seen their peers and others that their families have taken different approaches, or they maybe didn't realize quite as much. We live out near Silicon Valley in Oakland, California, so most people are pretty aware of these challenges and some of the addictive mechanisms that underlie them. But I think there are a lot of things that we need to be doing and talking about that stem from this being a broader problem, right? Our kids aren't playing outside as much anymore. Our kids don't have the independence they used to have. That isn't just because they're on devices. There's a causal relationship between all of these things, right? And sports, the professionalization of youth sports, they're not as fun as they used to be. If you ask your kid honestly, right? Compared to the pickup I used to play in the street when I was a kid, that doesn't exist the same way anymore. Things become serious a lot earlier, and I see this happening with my kids, and I don't love it. So a lot of these things are also problematic. And then you see kind of the broader world and what's happening in our political system, the way that our leaders talk about other people from other countries, right? The way that we are othering people in our national rhetoric at the highest levels. Like all of that's reflected in our technology and how people use it, right? You can't eliminate due process rights and grab people off the street and detain them and, deport them to a different country and not think that's not going to have a trickle-down effect on how people treat each other. So what I love is that you're seeing a lot of backlash against this. So again, I live in Oakland, California on purpose. I do not live in San Francisco or the Valley on purpose because there's community out there in the ways I recognize community, right? I think many of us have taken a lot of heart from Minneapolis. Okay, that's put up as an example of people coming together around an acute problem and figuring out these ways to solve it. So all of these things, I think, there's weights and balances happening all over, but they're happening in every sector. And one thing that I worry about a lot, and here I'll get a little bit draconian, you may be familiar with the concept of tech obsolescence. This is the idea that, why do you need a new phone every couple of years? You don't need a new phone every couple of years. It's built that way, right? It's built so that you have to go get a new one because there's some feature you need, or the thing starts getting so slow that your brain can't handle, right? Whatever it is. I really worry that we are going to start seeing the beginning of human obsolescence, where we can outsource so much of what we do, the cognitive load, the connections to our devices or other places, that we're going to start seeing the ways that we identify as human becoming quaint. That really concerns me. So this is what I'm working on now across all my various projects. I'm bringing this sort of sensibility to all the different work that I'm doing. I don't have answers, but I think we have to be having these conversations and asking questions, and in every room I'm in, that's what I'm trying to do. So thank you very much.
Thank you for that, and let's get into it. We're told we live in the most connected era in history. 3 billion people, Ty, are on social media. AI companions now offer intimate relationships as a service. And yet the data tells us something very alarming. That is, the amount of Americans with 0 close friends has quadrupled since 1990. So I'd like to start with a provocation for you specifically. Are we actually more isolated or just differently connected? What does the data say?
It's a really good question for early in the morning. Let me see if I can do that. Yeah, so even before, so 2012 is kind of a threshold year because that's when you see smartphone adoption really go past 50%, where people are chronically on their phone, and you see social media platforms become widely adopted. So 2012 is kind of this interesting year to think about. Some of you might remember this book, Bowling Alone, that was published in 1999. So, you know, part of this is that the social isolation problem has been brewing for quite some time and precedes this onset of widespread technological adoption. And part of it comes from even city planning and architecture. The way that our neighborhoods are organized are much more isolated, the way that we travel around by car so much now and live in bigger cities. So there's a lot of structural and infrastructure things that drive this loneliness outside of technology. I think one of the things for us to think critically about today is almost all of this data is correlational, which means that we can't say that with confidence that it's technology causing the loneliness. Maybe it's the case that people who are more lonely are more likely to engage in high social media use, right? And so we are more isolated. I think the data that you talked about is really heartbreaking because you can extend it beyond that. That same survey looked at how many people do you have who you can talk to about a serious problem, or how many people can you go to when you're in serious need. And you've seen similar rates of decline there, where a high proportion of Americans have nobody that they can talk to. The rates are particularly pronounced among young men, okay? So when you hear about the crisis that young men are in, it's so rooted, I think, in this lack of intimate connection with others, that they can speak openly and be genuine and have someone respond in a way that feels responsive and empathic. So the quantity and quality thing, I think, is a big deal. And if you look at the social science data, the good news, I think, is you don't need much. You only need 2 or 3 close, intimate connections in your life to be functioning in a healthy kind of way. So it's not some outrageous bar, but that data you talk about suggests we're not meeting that bar.
Cynthia, just launching off of Ty there, when a new client comes to you struggling with loneliness, what's the pattern you see? Is this a new problem, an old problem? How has the problem changed?
Thank you. That's a great question. Clients come feeling stuck, lacking safety, not knowing who and what they can trust. The level of anxiety has amplified. And I've been doing this for like 25 years, so I'm watching it grow. I'm watching people talk about the fact that they don't feel as engaged. They don't want to take as many risks. They're not as curious. And so it feels like even though the algorithms have us down these addictive rabbit holes, they're not inviting us to be expansive and creative. And I was so grateful that you, Sheila, that you spoke about the human thing. There's a scientist whose name is Greg Braden, and he wrote this book called Pure Human, and it absolutely talked about what you're saying. What I'm finding is that because of this isolation, people don't know how to build community. They're not sure that they can trust the communities that they're in, either personally or professionally. They don't know that they belong, and they don't know how to cultivate belonging. So the level of anxiety rises, and some are self-medicating. Some are drinking, some are drugging, some are medications, and they want connection, but are afraid to step out and seek it.
Sheila, just off of that and abstracting outwards, you've been in the rooms where tech and governance are designed. Candidly speaking, when the architects of our digital world speak of isolationism in private, do they see it as a bug or do they see it as a feature?
What a great question. What a great question. Well, it depends. I think there's variance. There's variance and variability across that. So I've had the, I don't know what you'd call it, the dubious privilege of being in rooms and being around people that are designing some of these systems. And I can tell you, well, let me back up a little bit. There's an arc that happens. So I do not believe that anyone goes into technology thinking that they want to mess with everyone's heads and create an addictive thing that is going to dehumanize us. Okay? I do not think that is the intention that is set. I think there are a confluence of factors, most of which have to do with money and our capitalist system and how it's set up and how we see returns and how we see success and how there's a definition that's existed since the beginning of time, but there's also been an evolution of that definition and the pressures that exist and all that at various points in time that do conspire without giving excuses to any of these people, but that do conspire to look to people to create, like, how do I scale? How do I grow this thing I've built, whatever it is? The origins of the internet are fundamentally broken. Okay, I don't think that's a radical statement, but in many rooms it is a very radical statement. Part of that is the business model that's evolved around technology and around technical platforms. So with social media, right, you have to imagine every time you go online onto a social media platform, there are like a billion bidders for your attention. And as creepy as that feels, that's what's happening, right? That's the advertising model in a nutshell. And somebody wins. Okay, it's not a coincidence. Some of us were talking last night about how we were having this conversation, and the running joke is you say something, if you're anywhere around your phone, next thing you know, you're fed ads about that thing. It's creepy. Okay, it's creepy. We all know it's creepy, right? So, but that's the business model. The business model is an attention-driven economy. They want your eyeballs as long as possible. And this is to the degree that, like, microseconds matter. The microsecond extra you spend on Instagram or TikTok or whatever it is, and it's true of all of them, so I could name any of them and it's equally flawed, okay? That is the business model. Until that is addressed, and we can move, there's a gentleman named Doc Searles, who was a very early OG internet guy. I had the true privilege of interviewing him on a stage about a couple months ago. And he pioneered this phrase, the intention economy. He said, we have to move from the attention economy to the intention economy, which means that you're there because there's a thing that you're getting out of that, right? There's something there that you are seeking that makes sense to you. There's a reinforcement loop that you are not habituated, right, or kind of dragged down a path, without realizing it, but that you are able to check in with that, right? Now, we kind of joke that, like, if you've ever fallen asleep in front of Netflix, okay, and there's that note that's like, are you alive? Are you here? Hello, hello, like, that doesn't necessarily, that's not really what I'm talking about, but it's better than nothing. Like, on some level, you're like, well, at least I had to, like, click a button, I'd, like, come out of my, oh my God, no, turn it off, whatever it is, right? Even something as simple as that, okay? So the way I talk about this now is about friction. And a lot of people in tech, the way I've kind of come to construct, I'm writing a piece called In Defense of Friction. And what I've come to is that, friction is not the enemy, right? But in a lot of tech and in our financial systems, in fintech, where I'm a deep expert, a lot of this is about, we got to remove intermediaries, we got to make things faster, always, 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 faster, easier, more convenient, whatever it is. But some of that friction is good friction. The friction of having a complicated conversation is good friction. The friction of my daughter having to go talk to her teacher rather than me emailing her teacher to ask for something is good friction, right? Sometimes when you hold your breath and you have to jump, that's friction, right? The more we eliminate all of that, what are we doing? Again, we're denying our humanity. We're denying that some of that struggle is growth, right? So again, all this goes back to the fundamental internet. The governance of it is flawed. Building anything on top of that, the rot is at the root, right? So you're building on top of a structure that's already problematic. And I'll close because I'm going long, so apologies. But one of the reasons I was so interested in the crypto economy and crypto architecture is the predicate premise was decentralization, was that you weren't going to have these monopoly models that could be so built. Now, to my deep chagrin and occasionally despair, what we've created is yet another group of different people who now are sort of the choke points and hold some of that, which was not the intention for many of us that came into that space over a decade ago, right? But again, the models of capitalism have proven to, yet again, be very, very sticky and very compelling to builders, right? And a lot of those pressures still apply, even in a decentralized architecture. So we have to find a different way. Thank you.
No, thank you. Pivoting back into the human experience, Scott shared with me something that I'd like to share with you over in the green room because it really struck me. He said he knows young people who have seen drive-by shootings but have not seen the stars. Now, you've taken people out of their digital lives and into nature among the sequoia trees and witnessed transformation. What happens in those moments that a screen just cannot replace?
Yeah, thank you for that question. So I work with gang members, and many of these gang members they're in the gangs because they want connection. Like, I ask them, why do you do this? Like, they're expecting me to come in. And just as a background, the reason that I do this work is because I was the victim of gang violence when I was 17. I was ambushed, attacked, brutally beaten, and left to die. And I was lucky to survive. But because of that experience, now I'm passionate about going and working with gang members. And they always expect me to come in and say, you shouldn't be in the gang. But instead I do the opposite. I say, of course you should be in the gang. And they're like, what? And I'm like, it obviously brings you something great. What are the reasons that you're in the gang? And connection is always at the top of the list. It's, my brothers have my back. These are deep friends who are there for me. And there are other things, a sense of power, in a world where so many of us can feel powerless. But I said, but what if we could have nonviolent gangs? What if we could get all those good things, but without having to fear that, my sister or brother might be shot because I'm in the gang? Is there a way that we could get the connection, the power, the friendship? So, we started talking, and I said, what would you love to do? And as Achilles mentioned, a lot of them had seen shootings but had never seen the stars. So we brainstormed, what if I took them, so I'm from LA, I said, what if we went to Sequoia National Park? And I showed them a picture of these giant redwood trees that we were gonna go out. And one of the gang members actually said to me, he thought I was tricking him. He said, no way, man. You mean to tell me there is a tree as big as a telephone pole? So I thought about telling him about the secret origins of telephone poles. But then I'm like, no. I'm gonna wait. I'm gonna bring them out to nature, and they're gonna see this, and they're gonna be so impressed. And sure enough, when we got out to nature, they saw these giant redwood trees, hundreds of feet in the air, and they could not stop talking about how trees of such magnitude would be perfect tools to deposit up each other's posteriors. They were like, man, that tree is so huge, I'm gonna shove it up your... I won't finish that sentence, I know there are young people here. And other people would be like, no, that tree's even bigger and I'm gonna shove it up your... So it was really beautiful. I'm like, the kids love nature. I actually wrote an article about this called Boys in the Wood. But it was transformative. Like they did, when we spent time in nature, when we spent time away from our digital devices, it truly was transformative. It connected them at a level that they had never been connected before. And so often, I'm sure all of us have these experiences where you're talking to people and they've got their phone and they're like, oh yeah. You know, I saw this cartoon in the New Yorker which said, what life was like during the days of cavemen and cave women. And it shows all these cavemen and cave women walking around looking at rocks. But like that's kind of what we have. And in this time in Sequoia National Park, away from our devices, there was true human connection with nature. And I'm still in touch with these gang members decades later, or I guess a decade later, and there's still like these incredible connections that were formed that are lasting, and that is just something beautiful that I think we can cultivate. We don't have to all go out to the national parks, although that's a very good thing, but there are so many ways, which I'm sure we'll talk about in the rest of the panel, for how we can cultivate this in our lives.
Thank you for sharing that. Now to the panel as a whole, and pushing back a little bit. As a Venezuelan immigrant, tech lets me maintain bonds with a diaspora and a family that, for reasons that most of us know, is now spread globally. And that would have been impossible for people like me just one generation ago. Where's the line between tech as a bridge and tech as a wall? Sheila.
You know, as we were talking, I was thinking about this morning, I spent some time in a WhatsApp chat group, which many of us have. And this is a WhatsApp chat that it came together in 2019 because each of us was having a baby. And it was a group that was an online group. It was a bunch of lawyer moms, and we all kind of had realized through the course of just this online, it was a Facebook group because I'm a Facebook generation, and we all came together offline and created this chat group. And then because of the pandemic, it kind of got really sticky. Like a lot of things the pandemic, did have actually. People had to move online, and you created these communities. Some of them were really stuck. There's a woman in this chat group I've never met in person, but I consider her a true deep friend, right? And she knows things about me that some of my in-person friends don't necessarily know because they haven't come up in those contexts. That is a really important and meaningful friendship to me, right? Even if I think I'd recognize her on the street, but maybe not. Who knows, right? We've never been in person. I don't really know exactly how tall she is. I don't find that to be an intimacy that is somehow flawed because it is not an in-person connection. And I think we have to acknowledge that as well, okay? But that being said, I think there's a difference between I think we have to talk about the predominance of chat groups and the importance of chat groups, okay? Because I think they're critically important. They're important for organizing. A lot of the information I get that's very confidential information comes through Signal chat groups with all kinds of activists and others I have all over the world are telling me things that are happening. Without that, journalists wouldn't get tips on things, right? Like a lot of that is happening in those media. But there's a difference, I think, between a selected chat group that is usually at a contained number. So I don't have the science on this, I'm sure one of you will know. There's a certain number of close friendships you can maintain before it gets a little crazy. The number's shockingly smaller than what people think. What's the number? 150. Okay, 150. So anything over that, it's not really meaningful in the ways that I think, would describe that. So there's a difference between a chat group like that and a public social media platform. And even if that is like, I've approved everyone in my TikTok channel or whatever it is, right? It's still, the performative nature of that is very different from the intimacy you can create in these smaller, more directed and more structured chats. And I think what you're talking about, Achilles, because I was on WhatsApp very early because I'm Indian, of Indian origin. And my cousins in India were on WhatsApp years before any one of my friends in the United States had heard of WhatsApp. okay, because that was what they did. It was cheaper, it was more effective, and we could have these asynchronous chats, and I think that's what you're describing. They put something, 12 hours later, I'd wake up and see it, and we had these beautiful conversations, and we've stayed close because of these chats. If I had to find time to call them on the phone, we'd talk maybe once every 6 months, realistically, right? So we can't underestimate that as well. But I think the form factor really matters. And the extent to which you feel you have to be performative, or you have to be performative, or if we're being honest about this, either because you're monetizing that stream, or someone is monetizing that stream, or you're judged for it, right? That's the difference, I think, between what you're describing, which I think I see as positive social connection and additive, to my intimate relationships, versus this kind of destructive, performative, nature of these other things. So I think it's an important distinction, and I thank you for the question.
So I think it's a both and. I am the board chair of an organization called the Global Livingston Institute, and we take students from different universities to Rwanda and Uganda to meet with other students there. So they get to learn from each other, they get to teach, they get to be in a different country, they get to have that experience. And I think the thing that breaks down the walls is us having conversations and connections and learning from each other and experiencing other places, because you can't be divided if you can feel connected to the people that you're with. When we come back from these trips, then we have a WhatsApp group, and they talk to each other, and they share, and they open to each other. The same thing, I take people on spiritual pilgrimages around the world, into different places and different experiences and different cultures, and then some of the people that I've taken, years later are on WhatsApp, talking to each other, asking for prayer because there's an illness, telling people, that they are having this experience. Does anybody else know what they can give to them or information they can share? So it becomes a both and. I think just the technology alone takes us away from our need to belong.
Can I follow up real quick? These are both really great comments, and if you were a queer teen in the early aughts, Tumblr was gold for connecting, right, and finding community. Similarly, in the neurodiversity community, that can be a really nice bridge for someone who has social skill deficits to connect initially, and then bridge that to in-life or real-life connections. So I think there are certainly a lot of positives that can come along with it. Another thing I want to just mention was, of course, a lot of us have noticed how social media has changed over the years. And remember the old days when people were actually your friends were the ones who were actually posting? And they were terrible posts about like their breakfast or whatever, but it was still your friends that you were seeing in your feed. And of course now the data suggests you're not seeing your friends post, and that's because they're not posting very much. And so our relationships on social media are largely parasocial now, where we know somebody but they don't know us. And that's fine, you don't have to be embarrassed about that, we all do it. But that's not a real relationship. And the final thing is this, is that there's a really cool study came out a couple years ago. And they wanted to see how teens who were really well socially adapted, who felt really connected and had rich community, did they use social media differently than kids who were lonely? And the findings I thought were really compelling. They found that kids who were socially adapted clearly saw social media as just a mechanism for in-person relationships. And so they liked their friends' posts far more often. When there was good news that their friends shared, they were much more likely to comment and give congratulations or encouragement. And they were far more likely to use social media as a way to get face-to-face, either one-on-one or in a group. So here's an example where you can use your agency and your assertiveness to say, I'm going to take command over how I use this platform.
Scott.
And I'll just add one thing. So my sister is super, super, super shy. And she's amazing, she's brilliant, but the way that she met her husband was online in a chat group, and he was super shy too. and they started out in a group chat, but then they like just did an individual chat, and every day for a year, they chatted for hours and just had this deep connection that, you talked about social awkwardness, they probably would not have been able to foster. And so finally, after a year of talking to each other one-on-one, they actually just lived like 3 miles away from each other. So finally, after a year of chatting online, they're like, do you think we should take this to the next level? Should we talk on the phone? So they talked on the phone for like 6 months before they finally met in person. So, and now they're married and they have a child. I mean, so there are beautiful ways of connection, especially for those of us who might be awkward, shy, introverted. So it can be a beautiful thing for connection.
That's really funny. I have a question right at the top here from a student with us today, Dawson, and he actually asked, what do you have to say about online community, and are they beneficial? So I think you answered it. I am absolutely flabbergasted and overwhelmed by the amount of questions that we've received. So I'm gonna kind of rip up my questions, because I used to come to the Conference of World Affairs when I first arrived in Boulder and didn't know anyone. And the magic of this conference is that these panels are not ours, but they're yours. So I'm going to pivot to your questions from here, but I'm going to be really selfish and ask one more for you, Ty. One of your books celebrates awkwardness as a strength, and I took my 13-year-old daughter out of school today to come join us today. She's right over there. I'm going to just point at her. In the age of curated digital personas, is there still room for the unpolished and weird, or is conformity mandatory now?
Yeah, that's a great observation. Now, maybe I'm being overly optimistic here. I think there is, and I think there's this backlash against the overly polished, actually, social media presence. So a lot of these videos, I mean, I have to admit, I'm still getting used to it a little bit, but the cinematography is terrible in some of these social media posts, right? And there's these people who are sometimes saying very smart things in their yapping videos, and they look like garbage. They just are not dressed, they haven't combed their hair. But people are resonating with these things, of course, because it seems more authentic. And that's going to be even more important as AI-generated content makes it hard to know whether the person's real or fake. And so this sloppiness, this messiness is actually a real asset now if you're someone who's an influencer taking social media seriously, which I think that's really great. There's still performative stuff, of course, that happens on social media. I get super uncomfortable. Maybe it's brave, maybe it's a good thing to do, but when people are doing a live stream and they're crying because like they just got broken up with or something, I mean, I guess it's real, but I get really uncomfortable. I get really uncomfortable with that. I think, my opinion is this. This is anecdotal. Gen Z knows intellectually what's going on. They see the ruse, they see the drawbacks and all of that. Now, sometimes they can't help themselves. That might be true. But they clearly see it. And they're going to demand that people are authentic. They're going to demand that people try to be their genuine, true self, and please don't stop doing that. That's a very positive social pressure that we're exerting on these social media platforms.
Okay, so now to you guys. I'm going to start with the students, and we'll get through as many as we can. I got a question here from Tamana, and she's a high school student, and she asks, some young adults or teenagers don't have a close person in real life, so they use social media in order to feel better and less vulnerable. They even have hobbies but don't have the energy for it. They want to sit next to someone or talk to them, but have nobody and use social media instead. What solution do you have for it? So, thoughts?
I just spoke. I feel a little bit bad going again here, but number one, whoever asked that question, I hear that. The society is not giving you a lot of great outlets compared to previous generations. So Gen Z gets to be this punching bag sometimes, and it's really our fault for creating the setup that you have. Even third spaces, which you'll see in the news and so forth. Third bases are not great. Third spaces are not great because a lot of times there is commerce involved with that. You have to pay to be involved. It's very different than being in the cul-de-sac with your friends and no supervision on your bikes and just wondering what the hell should we do with our afternoon. That's not available to you as much, and so if you're seeking some support and some solace in social media, I totally understand that. There is an opportunity cost, though, I'll say. One of the things I like to think about is if I'm doing X, I'm not doing Y. I think about my life like that a lot. So if you're on social media, that means that you're not in person with somebody. Now, that's a bit of a paradox I've laid out for you, because the options aren't great, but also if you're on social media, you're not doing the thing you actually need to do. I wish I had a clear answer for you, but I'll say this as someone who's naturally socially awkward. All initial interactions are socially awkward, okay? Even for people who are socially adept, they are socially awkward and anxiety-provoking and uncomfortable. And if you can, what we would call have distress tolerance, if you can sit with that awkwardness and know that this is a common thing to have, and if the two of you can push through, it's really just like 30 minutes to maybe an hour. If you can push through that awkwardness, on the other side of that is like a real person and real conversation and real connection, okay? And so I guess that's what I'd encourage you to do, and if that's helpful at all, as someone who still feels awkward a lot of times naturally in conversations, I just tell myself, dude, just hang in there, 20, 30 minutes, and there's probably really good things on the other side of that.
And Sheila, do you have thoughts on this?
I do. I have a 12-year-old daughter who, I hope she never sees this because she'll get really mad at me, but she asked me the other day, Mom, when did you stop feeling awkward? And I was like, honey, I never stop feeling awkward, right? I feel awkward all the time, right? I mean, I came to this conference not knowing a single person here, not even really understanding how I got here. All of that is true. The first panel I was on, as a side note, was on, basically wound up being about imposter syndrome, okay? And the conclusion of this incredible panel of women that I was with was like, it always, every time you think you've kind of cracked some of that code, there's just more to be done. So, could not agree more with Ty that, a new encounter is usually awkward, more often than not. But there's also, I think, an age where awkwardness is the dominant feeling that you feel. And that does stop. That phase does stop. You never stop feeling awkward to some degree, but I remember vividly, right, my middle school through early high school years where I felt awkward. I woke up feeling awkward. I went to bed feeling awkward. I maybe didn't feel awkward like in the library with my best friend at lunch. Do you know what I mean? Like that was sort of the day. And so on that note, I just want to speak up in defense of public libraries. I am a gigantic, every time I feel depressed, I go to my local library and tell them, okay? And there is something happening there. There is some class, there is some circle, there is some whatever, or there's a librarian, okay? Whatever it is, there is a person, and I go in and I see these kids, and there's always the one in the corner, and there's the other group, but they're kind of like, So if you don't know where to go, and you don't want to pay the price of sitting in the coffee shop, which also is its own awkwardness, by the way, are you really going to go up to the person next to you and be like, hey, what are you working on? You're not going to do that, right? Because they're like, I'm working, whatever it is. The public library, the school library, the public library, those are the safest places I've ever found in my entire life, and they're places I still go when I just need a space to kind of get away and think. So.
That's amazing, and that actually dovetails beautifully into the next question we got. By the way, as somebody who was and still is incredibly awkward, I know I'm putting up a good front today, but I took refuge at the library so much during school they eventually gave me a job. But as we build on that, and I'd like to hear first from you, Cynthia, and then from you, Scott. We got a question from Ursal that I think is expansive. What is human connection beyond a friendship? How can one balance not only social media and the real world, but also other systems that deprive one from socializing or connection?
For me, human connection is feeling seen, feeling heard, feeling recognized, and a curiosity about who we are. The other night we had this networking group here, and it was really about being curious. Who's sitting next to you that you don't know? Who are they? What do they bring? You know, I don't know that I was awkward as a kid, but I was very protective because I came from a violent childhood. So one of the things that I think fostered human connection for me was my passion points. I joined clubs where I could be on the debate team, or I could be in the French club, where people had the same interests that I had, and that we could talk about them. Now, it didn't guarantee that we were going to be best friends, but what it did, it would say, we have a similar interest, and why is that? And what makes us similar based on what we've chosen? I have a large online community, and in my community, I have events that support certain things. Like there are some people that want to meditate, and so they come. There's another one where we have community conversations. There's another one where we share poetry. I think if you can tap into what lights you up and then connect with people that have the same interests, that amplifies the human connection.
Scott?
This is a powerful question for me too, because like everybody confessing their awkwardness, I'm an introvert trapped in an extrovert's body, and so oftentimes I'm put in these awkward situations. I don't know what to say, I don't know what to talk about, but the great thing is most people love to talk, and so when you said that human connection is about being seen and heard and recognized and valued, I find that oftentimes just being curious about other people and hearing them speak their truths, what they're passionate about, they come alive, they flourish. At the networking session the other day, I had this quote by Robert Frost that said, "Everybody has the irresistible desire to be irresistibly desired." And so if we can like treat people like everything they say is a gem, that you're like, you want to learn from their wisdom. I heard this story that was similar to this. This is an apocryphal story about there's a monastery in Eastern Europe, and the monastery has been kind of falling apart, and the monks have been dying off, and no new monks are joining the order. So there are only like 5 monks left, and they notice that nearby there's a synagogue that's flourishing. And even though the Jewish community in this region of Eastern Europe is very small, this synagogue is absolutely thriving. So they called the rabbi and said, "Can you give us advice? Can you come here?" So the rabbi comes, tours the monastery, meets the monks, and says, "Well, I don't know much about your religion, but all I can tell you is I'm pretty sure one of you is the Messiah." And then all of a sudden they start looking at each other very differently. Is Sheila the Messiah? Is Ty the Messiah? Cynthia, Achilles? One of us is the Messiah. And they start treating each other with such respect and such awe that it brings something out that flourishes in each one of them. And people in the community start seeing that, and they get attracted to the monastery, and their numbers grow and grow and grow, and pretty soon the monastery is flourishing again. And I think if we have that attitude where we can treat each other like the Messiah, and like another story which is very similar is there was a period in the 19th century when there were these two contenders to become Prime Minister of England, one of them Gladstone, the other one Disraeli. And this woman, I think it was actually Winston Churchill's mother, this is a true story, had the opportunity to sit down with each one of them. So she met with Gladstone first, and everybody said, "What is Mr. Gladstone like?" And she says, "Oh my goodness, Mr. Gladstone is the most charming, witty, brilliant person I've ever met." And then the next night she went out with Disraeli, and everybody wanted to know, what was that like? And she said, "Oh my goodness, Mr. Disraeli made me feel like I was the most charming, witty, brilliant person he had ever met." If you can do that for other people, what a gift. And so for those of us who are introverted or socially awkward or don't know what to do, just open up and listen to other people and ask good questions and authentically be curious about what makes them tick. And you will see people flourish. You will see people come alive because, as Cynthia said, everybody is desperate for this connection. Everybody wants to be seen and heard and valued. But as Achilles said, the statistics of how many people feel like we don't have these friendships, we don't have these connections, let's give that gift to each other.
Wow. I feel like I'm really flubbing as a moderator here because you're answering questions that are just ahead. But let's just sit that for a moment. We have a question from Carolyn, and Carolyn is a grad student in journalism, and I honestly, wherever you are, Carolyn, I can't think of a more brave and important focus of study for society right now. Yeah. And she's in the stream with what you were just talking about, so maybe we can expand it to the rest of the panel. And she talks about media creating such a low barrier of entry to connection, and how can people develop more thirst in real life for human connection. So maybe Sheila, you have some thoughts on this?
I want to make sure I'm understanding the question. So the idea is that because there's so much content coming at us, we feel connected in these parasocial ways?
Yeah.
Is that how you're interpreting the question?
The way I read it is, yeah, it's a question of competition, you know? And it brought me back to what you were saying earlier, in terms of how does real world connection, how does stepping beyond that awkwardness tie? What are hacks, perhaps, that we can bring into the world to develop greater thirst?
This is a great question. And so, we talk a lot about, in tech, we talk about the signal to noise ratio. And the idea is that there's a lot of noise coming at you, right? There's a lot of this, whether it's content, it's a flow of information, it's incessant. At any moment, 24/7, you can open your device and there's going to be content coming at you, right? There's never silence unless you're actively choosing silence, which is a concept, by the way, I think is really powerful, that I fail at a lot, but I try to choose silence. And then there's signal. And signal is when you get a note from your friend, or you get a note from your family member, right? Or there's something that sparks with you, and you know the difference between signal and noise. Sometimes it's literally where is the source of the content. Sometimes it's a gem that you gather that changes the way you think. This is also true, I would argue, in ordinary conversation, right? There's nuggets of wisdom that just stick with you, and other things maybe that are a little bit more kind of going with the stream. So how do you control your signal to noise ratio is an incredible question online. And I go back to what Ty said, that this has changed in social media platforms over time, dramatically. It used to be that 99% of the content that came through my feed was people that I knew. Or at most, it was friends of my friends, right? At most. And I could see the connection because it would flag, like, this is a friend of so-and-so. It actually used to do that, these algorithms. Now, I have to scroll so much to find a single person I've ever met. And I can't even tell the difference between advertisement, this and that. The only thing I really do to note the difference is it public content or private content, right? Is that globe up there, or is it like the lock, right? And then I kind of know, okay, so I try not to even look at the feed and at the content before I gauge, like, what is the sort of distribution of it as a very faulty mechanism for screening, right? But it is this ongoing question. I think it's really hard, Achilles, and that's why I love this question, because for those of us that want to stay informed, like, I'm scrolling my media feeds, leave aside social media, but I'm scrolling my journalism feeds, let's call them, right? I'm refreshing the Guardian app on a very regular basis, right? I'm refreshing the New York Times, whatever it is, Politico, whatever it is, because I want to know what's going on, and even there, you're seeing a muddled, you're seeing lower, I'd argue, signal to noise, even coming from traditional sources of content that I trust. I trust these resources to be researched, vetted, verified. Not that many of them, but some of them I really still having a hard time getting the content that I actually want to see. Right? It's almost impossible to train these algorithms to your preferences at this point in time. So this is a very depressing answer. I think it's such a great question. And what I think it's about is recognizing the signal to noise problem, like understanding that exists. If that isn't a frame you've had in your head, hopefully that's helpful to understand that, and trying to find the places where you are seeing that you're getting more signal than noise. And there are going to be differences. There's definitely a difference between what I get from the Guardian, than what I get from my social media feed in terms of signal to noise.
I'd like to make some room as we go into the last, 10 minutes that we have. And I'm not quite sure how to phrase this, and I might get emotional. It's a question that came in. Sorry. A high school student wants to know from Utah how to stop using the phone. I'm addicted.
Man, that is emotional, isn't it? There's like a desperation to that a bit, I think, right? And I think everybody can probably feel that. Let me share two things I thought were so cool recently. There's an article in the New York Times about 2 years ago. A young woman at a local high school in New York, started a Luddite club. So that's people who are anti-technology. She had this radical idea that to be a member in it, all it meant was on Thursday you have to leave your phone at school, not have it with you. And they were going to do this wild thing and go into the woods nearby and talk to each other. The Luddite Club was growing exponentially. Students were hungry for this, and they go in the woods, and they might read a book, or they might talk to each other, whatever else. They even took it a step further, where having a flip phone became a status symbol among that group, and it really transformed those students' lives. There was a more recent story of a high school girls basketball team in California, started the season 1 and 10. They were terrible. The coach came to them, and for parents and teachers, let's pay attention, right, to how she did it. She said, "Hey, look, I get this idea. We stink right now. Would you be willing to help me with an experiment? What if when you get to school, when you get to practice, we put our phones in this bag, and we won't take them out until after you leave to go home. And when we go to a game, you're going to do the same thing. As soon as you get to the locker room, we're going to put them in this bag." They ended up making it to the state championship game, totally turning around their season, going undefeated. And when they interviewed these young women, they said, what happened? They said, "We actually talked to each other on the bus. We hung out in the locker room, and we'd hang out for far longer because we were so hungry. We were so desperate for this kind of interaction." And so there's all these positive stories that are happening around the world, and I think we can take hope in these stories. And, I'll tell you personally, I kind of think of myself as just a dumb guy, and my mind's not that sophisticated. And I wanted to do more deep work. So if you get to be friends with me, you will not be able to get a hold of me from 7 to 11 a.m. any day of the week. My phone is off, it's in my bag, there's no shot you can get me. A similar things happen socially. My friend Emily has this really good technique. She'll say, hey Ty, I'll meet you at the park where we plan to meet. I won't have my phone with me, just so you know. That sends a great message to me that when we have dinner, Emily's not gonna have her phone at all. So what do I do? I leave my phone at home too, okay? So these social contracts where you say, you know what? Can we just promise each other that for this hour or 2 hours, that we'll just turn our phones off or leave them in our bag? You know? The answer is actually pretty simple, and I think we all know that, but we just have to take the initiative and the agency to make these things happen.
Sheila, I know you wanted to add here,
Yeah,
and you as well, Cynthia.
Thank you. You know, I just want to address whoever asked that question, which is such a vulnerable question that I really appreciate, and I'm also going to get very emotional. And so, what I want to say is a different thing, which is that's not your fault. Okay, and so if you feel if you find it really difficult to put down your device, if you feel addicted to your device, that is not your fault. And I have a fully developed prefrontal cortex, or so I'm told. Evidence sometimes varies, and I find it difficult, right? And there's always an excuse for why I need to be on my phone, because I'm going to miss something from work or something else. And so I just want to say, you know, it is not your fault, and these devices were designed for that. Okay, like somebody made a choice. And so I'll tell you a story about when this really got driven home to me, which is when I was a newer parent. I have 3 daughters now, but the first daughter, you know, I think we can all acknowledge parenting is a skill. You have to learn it. I'm the oldest child. I have a lot more empathy for my parents now because you don't really know what you're doing, right? And so when my daughter was going into kindergarten, and we were looking at all the different kindergartens. Okay, this is like a crazy, we were a little bit intense about this, to be honest. So from preschool to kindergarten, which school should we move, all this kind of stuff. And there's like very different philosophies. There's a philosophy that's like absolutely no technology at school ever. There's a fully, teched up philosophy, and you have to kind of decide as a parent, if you have the luxury of choice, like what are you gonna do? And I said to my husband, who's a technologist, he's been a computer scientist his whole career, are we going to be disadvantaging our child if we put them in a no-tech environment? And we kind of went back and forth, and he was like, no, absolutely not. We should have the least tech possible, which was my instinct, but I was like worried about it. So he's like, one day he got a little frustrated. He's like, look, just hand our daughter, who was 4.5 or whatever, hand her your phone. So she'd never seen, I'd handed her my phone. Within a minute, she had figured out how to scroll, okay? Within a minute. And he said, you see what I'm saying? Right? He's like, this was designed for that scenario. It was designed to be as easy and intuitive to this swiping gesture, this thing, right? It was designed deliberately through many, many trials and focus groups and whatever to be as intuitive as possible. The idea that our child is not going to be able to figure out how to use an iPad is crazy, okay? And I was like, oh, you make a very good point, And so we put our kid in a school, all 3 of them, that had no technology until about, 4th grade, which is now a pretty standard thing to do, I would say, okay? So what I want to just again say is if you feel any sort of shame about this, about feeling addicted to your phone, you are not alone, and it's not your fault. Okay, and I love what Ty said about finding an ally, anybody in your life, a sibling, a friend, somebody, and enlisting your parents, hopefully, to help with this, to say, like, this is something I'm concerned about. I'm hopeful that that will help you address this, and kudos to you for recognizing this.
So let's hear from the other half of the panel on this and breach that human and spiritual interface. Cynthia.
First of all, bravo for putting that question out. When I work with leaders, they come in with lofty goals and or challenges, and we set up a plan. I also make sure that they have an accountability partner. What I want to say to you is, first of all, you're not going to jump from all the time to nothing in a moment. But if you have someone who may be having the same issue and you want to work on it together, you can start with 5 minutes. For 5 minutes today at 7:30, I'm putting my phone down. Or how about we're gonna go have coffee and we're not gonna bring our phones for that time. You start small. Because if you don't, if you try to take a quantum leap, it sets you up for what feels like failure and more shame. I used to smoke, and I would always say, oh, it doesn't control me. I can stop anytime I want to. And then something would happen and I'd be back in. And so what I did was I journaled. You know, this is so crazy. Why are you know what I mean? I journaled about the feelings, and then I would say a blessing every day about I only want to crave what is good for me. And I just did a little bit each day, and a year later, the craving went away. There is no habit that you have that you can solve instantly. It takes little tiny steps, and if you have someone that wants to support you, then have them walk the path with you.
Thank you so much for that. I was just informed that we are at our hard stop. So I'd like to thank the panelists. I'm sure we could go on for a lot more, and perhaps, if time allows, we will on the sides there. And to everyone who came today, thank you so much, and thank you for the thoughtful questions.